Annie Lane, and I am a therapist with Path of Ohio. I'm located in the East One region. The other thing that I do is tasks and job projects associated with being the clinical lead for the state of Ohio. So if you are attending this training today or watching it, but as it's been previously recorded, it's likely because you're a brand new therapist with Path somewhere in Ohio. So today we're going to be going over a lot of different aspects of utilizing our electronic medical record, which is Carelogic, and what aspects of that medical record that the therapist is going to utilize. So we will talk about basically first, we're going to start with logging in, what your schedule and what your Carelogic is supposed to look like. We will talk about organizations or client locations, is really interchangeable, that terminology. And we'll go through scheduling an appointment. And I'll also be showing you every location of every document that you may need to use as a therapist with PATH in Ohio. We'll also talk about the intake document, which is the clinical comprehensive clinical assessment, or CCA. We'll talk about ISPs, which are individualized service plans or treatment plans. We will also talk about discharges and some other aspects of Carelogic that you may use that would benefit you as a therapist. So first, we will get into scheduling and logging in and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you are a new therapist and you are watching this recorded training, you've probably already been through the HR portion of orientation, and you will have received your Carelogic username, password, and your individualized electronic signature that you will use to sign off on your documents. And in some cases, you will enter that information in and send it on to your clinical supervisor so that they can approve of that document. So if you finish the HR portion of the training or orientation, you will have your login information and your electronic signature. So the first thing you're going to do is when you get to the Carelogic site, the account is always going to be Path. You will enter your username and you will enter your password. What happens next, you will see, is this type of screen will come up. And this screen is where it always populates when you log in. Up here on the upper right-hand side is going to be the name of your organization. With Carelogic, organization and location are kind of interchangeable. My location is Portsmouth, Gallia Street, and when I log in, this is what comes up here. So you'll want to check and make sure when you log in that you are logged in at the correct location. Your correct location is going to be your kind of home office or home site that you have been assigned to. When I get in here first thing in the morning, I have to go ahead and change this to a different location just based on my role and having access to charts and information across Ohio. Most likely, the organization or location that pops up when you log in, it's probably not going to be changed. However, when we get into scheduling here in a second, you will need to ensure that when you're scheduling your clients for ongoing sessions, that the location or organization matches the client's organization or location. So first thing we're going to look at here, these tabs up here. You're going to use my caseload a great deal as a tab, and you'll also use my schedule. To get to your schedule, once you log in, you will click directly on my schedule. Don't click on any of these, just hover directly over my schedule and click it. Your schedule will be built out to look something like this. Today, I don't have any clients scheduled, which was on purpose because of HIPAA, other than QSI Test, who is scheduled for an intake and we will look at that a little bit later. So the first thing we're going to look at here is scheduling a client session. Over here on the left, you have Schedule tab where something has already been scheduled. Same thing down here. You'll see a C, a G, and an S. C stands for client, G stands for group, and S stands for staff or staff activity. Most likely, you're going to be using C and S the most often. Groups are upcoming, and we will get into the logistics of that at a later date. So in order to schedule a client's appointment, as long as you are scheduling an appointment in the future, here's how you do it. Click on C. It will bring you to this page. C stands for client activity. For our purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and schedule it today for noon. So I got to check the date correctly. And as long as I'm scheduling in the future, again, this is what I'm going to use. So to start over quickly, in the morning when you log in, your account will be path. You add your username and password. It will bring you to this page. You will check to make sure that the location or organization in the upper right is the correct one, whichever office you've been assigned to. From this page, you will click directly on My Schedule, and it will take you to your schedule. Here we are with letter C. So we're scheduling a client activity in the future. Check to make sure it's the date you want and the time you want. So I'm going to schedule this therapy session, a regular ongoing therapy session, not an intake, for an hour slot. Make sure that you are clicking the right AM and PM here. We're not scheduling from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. It's going to be 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. I mentioned organization as location being synonymous, same thing earlier. Most of my clients are scheduled at the site that I work out of, which is Portsmouth. So you will choose your site there or whichever location you are scheduling in accordance with the client's face sheet. You'll find that information there, and we'll look at that here in a minute. For our purposes today, I'm going to go back to Ohio. You should find your staff name here, and you can search your client this way. We are using a test client. Client program. Program is the same thing as basically line of service. So at PATH, we offer case management, MedSom, which is most likely a nurse prac, in some cases a psychiatrist, nursing, and therapy. Most of the time, we're going to be scheduling therapy. So your program is the line of service that you're providing and billing on or engaging in with the client. The activity, if you are scheduling an ongoing or therapy session and it's after the intake and it's just going to be a regular, 1 hour therapy session approximately, you're going to choose this one right here. IND Psy ISP update. Once that populates, you will put in the location of the client. If the client, as far as you know, is coming in office, for example, you would choose office. If you know that you're scheduling the client for telehealth, you would choose telehealth. We'll choose office for this one. This right here, sometimes these messages are best for our office managers, so we want to show it on the front desk. You don't have to show it on your schedule if you just want to make a note. But I usually click this. It also helps remind me. You can add in a note like this. So once you've ensured that the service date is correct in the future, your times are correct, your location or organization is correct, staff, client, the program that you're billing on, the activity, whether or not it's, for example, in person or telehealth. And if you want a message to remind yourself or maybe another person within Path, maybe your office manager, you can add something here and click Show Message on Front Desk. When I'm done with any page in Carelogic, I'm going to want to save my work. And in this case, we're going to want to save our work so that it populates on our schedule. The Submit button in the upper right is basically the same thing as Save. So you will click Submit. You will confirm that that's what you want to do by clicking Yes. Click Submit again, and this client will appear here on your schedule. There are a couple of other types of scheduling that we will look at. First is blocking out your schedule for staff activity. What's a staff activity? You may have a meeting scheduled. You may have lunch scheduled. Maybe you take an hour for lunch or 30 minutes for lunch, and you want to indicate that on your schedule. Why would we show these things on our schedule? If your office manager is doing scheduling, they're going to want to know when you're available. And there are going to be times when it's not just client activities, it may be a staff activity. So, for example, if I want to block out a staff activity, I'm going to click S. And it doesn't matter where you click S, because once you click it, you will be able to input the time. So let's schedule a staff activity for 5 o'clock today. And again, as long as you're scheduling it in the future, that's where you would use the S function. Same thing as the C function. If you're scheduling in the future, that's how it rolls. This is quirky. You have to make sure that you put in 05.30. You'll choose your organization or location. Make sure the staff name is correct. And the activity is either block activity or out of office sick, out of office vacation. You can choose any of those. For block activity, usually that's what I use. And then I will have a little description as a reminder here. I'm not taking lunch at 5 p.m. today, but for example, lunch, I blocked out 30 minutes. Go up to Submit to save your work. Confirm. Submit again. And there it appears on your schedule as a staff activity. The other type of scheduling is going to come into play if when maybe you have a client contact that is unplanned and it occurred not in the future for scheduling, but in the past. Maybe you get a phone call from a client that is in crisis or not in crisis, but you're able to take the phone call at the time. And by the time that has passed, it's in the past. So how do we recoup whatever billing that you're going to do based on an unexpected client activity? So that means we're going to schedule backward. Sometimes case managers use this function, and therapists will use this function again if there is something unexpected that comes up with a client that you are going to bill for and take note, do a progress note on. So here's what scheduling backward looks like. Let me share my screen again. So again, if we're scheduling in the future, we're going to do a client activity under C, staff activity under S, and you can adjust the times when you get to that page. For scheduling backward, for example, I'm going to hover over my schedule, and I'm going to go down to activities. Scheduling backward can be called batch activity. So batch activity is what you're going to choose here. Click on it. This page does not look like the regular scheduling page when you're scheduling forward, but it basically contains the same information. Let's say a client called me and I wanted to recoup my time for that, and it wasn't already on my schedule. Maybe they called me about getting some consents done, or maybe they called because they want to update the therapist on something that's changed in their life, which may lead us to adjusting their ISP or treatment plan. In this case, we're just going to schedule, for example, a case management activity. So you'll choose your organization. You will search your client here. It will populate. We're going to schedule case management. We will select our activity code, which is case management. It may be TBS, most likely case management. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, the difference between CPST and TBS, which is also covered in the orientation that I do typically on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, and you will probably get that portion after you watch this recording. So we'll choose CPST for case management. On this page, and the way that my laptop is set up, I have to scroll over to complete the rest of this form before I submit it or save it. We'll choose a service location. For this case, the client called in and it wasn't planned or already scheduled. Add your times. Scroll around, make sure everything's filled in. Hit submit to save. And there you will find that while it's 11:51 p.m. Eastern time here, I was still able to put this client on my schedule. And when we get into the progress note, I'll be able to show that we'll be able to bill on this, even though it is somewhat in the past. All right. The next thing that I'll show in this portion of the training is where items are located within the client's chart. You'll remember this a lot more when you're actually hands-on doing it, but basically, client's chart. Oh, I wanted to make a note and let you guys know that over here is the schedule of the calendar that you can navigate this way or clicking on the date. Pretty cut and dry. For example, if I'm scheduling on into the future, next week, the week after, I can navigate this way. So the main tabs that you're going to be using are my schedule and my caseload. A lot of it's going to be under my caseload. When we get a little bit more into doing the CCA and the ISP, I will explain the difference between being on your schedule in the billing environment where you do your progress notes versus being inside the client's chart. You can search a client up here. The name, the spelling doesn't have to be exact, but if you type this in here and hit enter, you're going to come up with possibly a list, but hopefully just the one client that you're trying to find. To return to your schedule, click on my schedule and it'll take you right back there. So to search a client up here, and also that's another way to get into a client's chart or ECR. For example, if I search a client here, this type of row will populate. You'll see this button, ECR, episodes, schedule, and info. You also see that the client is active under status as opposed to discharged. We have an active client here. Minimal, birth date, social security number. Once you search a client and the name or names populate and you choose the correct one, you're going to click on ECR, and this will take you into the client's chart. Here is the face sheet, and we will get back to that in just a second. But I do want you to note that one way to know that you're inside a client's chart versus on your schedule or the billing environment where you do your progress note is that if you're in the client's chart, their name will populate up here. Again, to get back to my schedule, click on my schedule. You will also know that you are not in a client's chart. For example, when we get into progress notes and we're charting and doing our progress note, You will not see the client's name populate because you're in the billing environment where you're doing your progress note and taking credit for the work that you've done. And that's basically how you also get paid and compensated for the work that you've done. That'll come more into play later. I'll explain more later. You can search a client to get to their chart, or, for example, if they're already on your schedule, you can click directly on the client's name in blue on your schedule. This will also take you to the client's ECR or face sheet or in their chart the same way that I did it up here. By going in that way, clicking on ECR will take you to the client's chart. Their name's at the top. Or you can go in through my schedule. So here we are inside the client's chart. There's their name. What you'll see on the face sheet, lots of pertinent information. By the way, you can also get back to your schedule this way. You're going to have their demographics up here. You're also going to see their location, and that's going to come into play with scheduling. For example, if I'm scheduling, I see clients primarily in Portsmouth, and I have one or two in different locations. So if I'm scheduling a client that is in a different location from where I sit, you will have clients on your caseload in various locations. So for example, let me just bounce back to the schedule. When you are scheduling a client, you'll want to check to make sure, scheduling in the future, as opposed to batch activity and scheduling backwards, you'll want to make sure that the client's organization or location matches up with the location on their face sheet. So here we go back into QSI test. Demographics here, contact information here. An office manager may have added information on their legal guardian here and their contact information, or it may just be the client's phone number. This gives you a brief overview of a call log, which we'll get into later. Active programs. If you remember when we were scheduling, if I'm scheduling a client activity, we talked about programs. Programs are the same thing as line of service that PATH offers. So, you're going to be choosing from case management, therapy. Those are the two that you'll use. Nurse pracs and the occasional psychiatrist will use MedSom, and nurses will use nursing. As therapists with PATH, we do use the case management program and the therapy program. So here I am back in the client's chart. There's the name up here. Here's the face sheet. So programs, active programs are going to be the lines of service: MedSom, case management, therapy, and nursing. You'll see the location or organization here, the staff member assigned, and hopefully if it's your client, then that's your name there. A brief overview of upcoming appointments, scheduled appointments that have taken place and upcoming. Over here, status. We will talk much more about status later, but you can see that some of these appointments were kept. There are other options for that too. On the upper right here on message board, where this says test client in red, what you will see on your client's face sheets may be information from an office manager that he or she or they have entered in this area. You may see information about a 10-day letter being sent as we're working toward discharge. You may see information that says something to the effect of client is open to telehealth or in-person, or client wants in-person only. You may see information indicating that the client is self-pay, for example. That'll be important later when we talk about intakes and CCAs. Generally, it's a good idea to check out this area, pay special attention to it, because other lines of service, most likely an office manager, is going to be entering information here that may be pertinent for all of us as providers to see. Here are the diagnoses. This will indicate treatment plan or ISP expiration. And here are service documents. Any additional information on financial would be here. Payer authorizations you may find here. As therapists, what we mainly want to take note of is their location or organization in the demographics. Any information that may be here in contact information about a legal guardian, or if we're trying to get a hold of the client themselves, their phone number will be here also. Anything that appears on the message board, those are important. Also, when we get into intakes later, it'll be important to look and make sure that all 4 of these organizations or, programs or lines of service are added. Once we are in a client's chart, we are going to use this tab a lot, My Caseload. Most likely, you are going to be most often using path assessment documents, clinical record, you will use consents, and you will use inquiry. Under path documents, you are going to use the discharge transfer summary. Anytime that you are starting a document within the client's chart, you will add it over here to the right. We will talk more about discharge summaries later. To get back to their face sheet page, you can click right there on their name. With path assessment documents, here's where we're going to find the comprehensive clinical assessment. To add, upper right-hand corner. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Back to the client's face sheet. We'll also see under path assessment documents, the comprehensive clinical assessment update, a freestanding mental status exam, the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, the lethality assessment, some of these used by nurse and MedSom, and then a couple of these over here, adult diagnostic assessment, adult DA update, child/adolescent diagnostic assessment, and child/adolescent DA update. We will talk about why these are here later on in the training. Under clinical record, you're going to find call log, memo to chart. These come into play a great deal when we're looking at discharges. You're going to also see under clinical record, treatment plans. At this point in time, no client should have this many treatment plans or ISPs. But since this is a test environment, that's why there looks like a lot. You'll add the document over here. We'll look at treatment plans later in the training. Inquiry, I use service history. We'll talk about that at the end of training. Path consent documents are found here, and we'll talk more about that toward the end of the training on how to create and add those as they are due at intake and annually. So those are some of the areas that you are going to find the items that you need. At the end of training, we'll also talk about my reports and running your active caseload report too. So that's some of the areas within the client's chart that you're going to be able to kind of navigate through and see as training goes on today. So that is going to wrap up this first portion of the training. Next, we're going to talk about progress notes and how we bill those on your schedule, what that looks like, how to create one and save it, how to send that on to your clinical supervisor for approval. And after that, we'll talk about the intake document, treatment plans, and discharges. So with that, the next part of the training, we will kick off doing the CCA or Comprehensive Clinical Assessment or intake. So thank you guys for listening. Next part of the training is coming up.